Good morning. It's so good to have full pews and to have the choir back and to hear everyone's voices. It's just wonderful. It was a quiet summer, and I can feel the Spirit in this place today. 2001, September 11th, was 15 years ago, and I was 15. It was half a lifetime ago for me, and I remember the boundless blue sky on that day as my mom picked me up from school in southeastern Pennsylvania and drove me home. And many of you know that I did not grow up as a Christian. I did not grow up in church. And for me, 9/11 shaped my theology. It made me question, how can anyone believe in God when things like this happen? And I think that there's still a part of me who feels that way sometimes. And this sermon addresses that. And there may be some of you that this sermon doesn't speak to, and that's okay. But with my working with youth and working in ministry, I have come across quite a bit of doubt and confusion, especially when bad things happen, when terrible things happen. How do we think about God then? So let's pick up with the text, shall we? In chapter 32, as we were told, Moses is on Mount Sinai receiving all kinds of laws and instructions from God. This is after he and God have led the Israelites out of slavery, out of Egypt, and they've been in the wilderness for some time. And Moses has been up there on top of that mountain for a while. He's been up there since chapter 24. Now that's a lot of chapters in the Bible. He's been up there for 40 days and 40 nights to be precise. And the Israelites have no idea what happened to Moses. And they don't even know if he's coming back. They say right in the beginning of chapter 32, "As for this Moses, we don't know what has become of him." And so they turn to Aaron, Moses' brother, who has been left in charge, and they ask him to fashion gods for them to worship. And so Aaron collects all of their gold and he fashions it into the golden calf. And many of us are familiar with this story, right? We've heard of the golden calf. And the next morning they get up and they praise the golden calf and they make sacrifices to it, and then they throw a giant rager. Now I'm looking out into this congregation today, and I have a sneaking suspicion that, as innocent as you all look out here in your church clothes, praying and confessing, that there's at least one of you who was a real wild child. You know, back before you had a mortgage. I'm willing to bet that someone in this sanctuary right now threw a really big party when their parents went away on vacation. And I'm willing to bet that you got caught. Because that's the way this story always ends, right? We see it in all those 80s and 90s coming-of-age movies. We had family friends when I was growing up, and they had 3 daughters, Erin, Colleen, and Katie. And their parents, Jack and Eileen, went out of town for a few days. Well, Erin and Katie decided to throw a party, and they had a ton of beer and a ton of people at the house. And the next morning when they were cleaning up, the phone rang, and Jack and Eileen said that they were coming home early. Surprise! Erin and Katie hadn't been able to get rid of all the trash from the party, so they took all the empty beer bottles and cans and they went down into the basement where they had a drop ceiling with, the tiles, and they pushed the tiles up and they shoved all the beer cans and beer bottles in the drop ceiling. Well, Jack and Eileen came home, and the place really it was pristine. They had cleaned up marvelously. You could not tell that there had been a party the night before. But Jack smelled something off. And so he went down into the basement with Eileen and the girls in tow. And the second that they hit the bottom step, the ceiling, which was heaving under the weight of the hidden beer bottles and cans, gave way, and they all came crashing down, shattering and spraying warm beer everywhere, and leaving a colossal hole in the ceiling. Now, this isn't a sermon about parties. I don't think it's sinful to drink and eat and dance and carry on in ways that are safe and legal for everyone. And I love a good party, and parties are a way for people to experience joy and celebration and diversion. So this isn't a sermon about parties, but it is a sermon about God and our relationship with God and our faithfulness. Now, this may not always be true, but typically, when a parent comes home to find their teen has thrown a party while they were gone, they're not angry that a bunch of kids probably had a pretty fun time. They're angry because these parties often lead to things like alcohol poisoning, drunk driving, sexual assault, property damage, and legal trouble. People get hurt. And they're angry because they extended faith to their children by trusting them to take care of themselves while they were away. And the children broke that trust. The anger comes from a place of fear and a sense of betrayal, and also one of deep love and care. The betrayal here to God is not that the Israelites reveled and feasted. It is that they turned to the golden statue, in this case a physical idol, and said, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." When God became absent to them, when Moses became absent to them, they turned to the nearest golden object and said, "This is the true God who saved me." And just like the loving wrath of a parent who has discovered you threw a kegger in their living room, God's wrath is terrifying. And I think the image of a wrathful God has been used and abused in ways that are inappropriate and wrong. And so I think that sometimes we might shy away from talking about God's anger, especially as it relates to our collective and our own sin. Something that this makes me think about is the Westboro Baptist Church in all their foolishness and hatefulness. I remember when 9/11 happened, they claimed that it was because of tolerance for Muslims, tolerance for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities, tolerance that they deemed to be sinful, and that God killed all those people on 9/11 for that. And I'll often see something from Pat Buchanan and his foolishness and hatefulness. He recently said that the Orlando Pulse nightclub shooting was God's punishment for the legalization of same-sex marriage. So when you take stories like this Exodus text, God feeling angry enough to destroy people because of their sin, and you take that and you twist it into that kind of hateful theology, that intolerant, unloving theology. Frankly, I go back into that 15-year-old full-on atheist mode. And I'll be honest, when I revisited Exodus 32 for this week, a part of me was really triggered by the story. Old hurts of being told I was going to hell because of who I was, because of my sin, were being activated. And as I was reading it, a part of me kept saying, nope, not my God. not my God. My God doesn't destroy people out of anger. My God doesn't pick and choose who gets to live and who gets to die. I can't co-sign that. And then a few days ago, this video of Cornel West, who was a professor at Union while I was there, was floating around on my Facebook feed. It's a few years old. And it's a short video, and it's called Healthy Atheism. And Dr. West said, and you should look it up because he really says it better than I can retell it, but he said, I come from a school of thought that believes that a certain kind of atheism is always healthy. I tell that to my dear brother, Bill Maher, all the time. Because what atheism does, it at least cleans the deck, because it claims that all gods are idols. And most gods are idols. It's just that the prophetic traditions, be it Islam, Judaism, Christianity, are tied to this God of love and justice. Because we live in a society in which idolatry is so ubiquitous, we view life as a gold rush. We end up worshiping a golden calf, and the golden rule becomes only those who have the gold will rule. That's idolatry all the way down. So a lot of folk who've lost faith in God, it's a very healthy thing, because the God they've lost faith in was probably an idol anyway. And the challenge becomes, are you still open enough and vulnerable enough in your soul to be open to something bigger than you, that's connected to love and justice, to honesty and decency and integrity? It's so difficult, especially in our society, not to be seduced by idols. You've got to be wise, you have to have courage, and you have to have the willingness to take a risk and be vulnerable. I called one of my best friends, Rabbi Lauren, about this text. It's pretty great to have a rabbi best friend, don't you think? And I said, Lauren, I don't know what to do with this text. I'm preaching it on 9/11. Does God really make decisions about who to kill or not? It seems erratic and scary, and I want to do it justice, because I know this text is so important in the Jewish tradition as it is in ours. And I love what she told me. She said, and I'm paraphrasing, well, God does seem a little erratic and scary at times, right? At least the world seems a little erratic and scary, and we wonder why God is letting it happen. And this story shows us that we can disagree with God. We can even be mad at God if we feel like it. It's okay. We can get angry at God just as God gets angry with us. It's a relationship, as Dave so eloquently put it in a serial metaphor. That was really great. And Lauren said, we see here Moses challenging God's intentions, and that's a real act of chutzpah. So I'm thinking about this, and later I'm watching this video of Cornel West, and I think, vulnerability. There's that chutzpah, the vulnerability, the risk to say to God, no, do not destroy us. You are the God of salvation. That is the God we have faith in. You are the God of justice and mercy. Do not destroy us. Perhaps God does not have it all planned out. When I say things like that, I'm worried I'm about to be struck by lightning. But perhaps God doesn't have it all planned out from beginning to end. Perhaps we can inspire God to have mercy on us, even when so many of us surely inspire God's anger. And Lauren also pointed out to me that she wants a God who is angered by human destruction. She doesn't want a God who is unchanged and immutable and unfazed by our consistent and constant turning to idolatry whenever God feels inaccessible to us. In fact, she said, this moment, this Exodus moment of the golden calf is treated in the Jewish tradition as the fall story. So in the Christian tradition, we often look at the Garden of Eden as the fall story, but in the Jewish tradition, they look at the golden calf as the fall story, that humans fall away from God when they practice idolatry. And she sent me the following from Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. And if you are unfamiliar with that name, I encourage you to look him up and read his mystical, magical, prophetic work. Heschel says, the prophets never thought that God's anger is something that cannot be accounted for, unpredictable, irrational. It is never a spontaneous outburst, but is a reaction occasioned by the conduct of humans. Human sense of injustice is a poor analogy to God's sense of injustice. The exploitation of the poor is to us a misdemeanor. To God, it is a disaster. Our reaction is disapproval. God's reaction is something no language can convey. Is it a sign of cruelty that God's anger is aroused when the rights of the poor are violated, when widows and orphans are oppressed? There is an evil which most of us condone and are even guilty of, indifference to evil. We remain neutral, impartial, and not easily moved by the wrongs done unto other people. Indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. How often do we turn to idols when God seems distant? When our religious and political leaders are absent physically, like Moses was up on that mountain? Or perhaps, and this might be more suitable to our current landscape, absent morally. What do we reach for when we feel that void? I remember that feeling, that void on this day 15 years ago. That void that feels like God is missing, gone, not real. Where is God in all of this? What do we reach for when, and maybe not all of us, but when some of us retreat into that full-on atheist mode? Because the only gods and theologies around us are idols that maim and destroy souls and lives. To me, this is the importance of spiritual practice. To me, loving God seems easy when you're chilling with him on top of a mountain. Loving God seems easy when you're eating a big bowl of macaroni and cheese, or snuggling with your beloved, or dancing with your friends, or living in healthy community. But what does it look like when we look at segments of our lives, segments of our culture, and we just can't seem to find God anywhere? Well, I have some thoughts. It might look like the firefighters who ran into those towers as they collapsed. It might look like Native Americans resisting big oil. It might look like accompanying the section of our town that currently has no access to fresh food. It might look like bold statements of inclusion of transgender persons. It might look like sitting and breathing when we're about to snap at our family. It might look like learning about the experiences of people who are disabled. It might look like practicing gratitude in times of struggle. It might look like practicing consent in our romantic lives. It might look like painting or drawing or writing poetry. It might look like finally getting into therapy. It might look like cutting down on our use of plastic. It might look like packaging 10,000 meals for those who need them. So what about you? What are your thoughts? What might it look like when you can't seem to find God at hand? Where can you turn rather than turning to the nearest idols? Well, it appears I haven't been struck by lightning yet. So here is my wish and my challenge. May we be vulnerable. May we have chutzpah. May we venture to change God's mind. May we turn away from the nearest idols. May we develop spiritual practices that restore us and our world, that bring God into the world. May we continue to wrestle with notions of God's omnipotence. May we continue to wrestle with and reclaim texts, biblical texts, that have been used to harm us and that have been used to harm others. And may we, when the God we are presented with is one we just can't believe in, be healthy atheists. A few weeks ago, Dave and Betsy and I went to visit a few sites of worship, one being the Mormon Temple in Philadelphia that was recently completed. Now, non-Mormons may not enter the temple once it is consecrated, but there is a short window of time when visitors may come inside. Now, I have some Mormon friends, and I do know and believe that there is a range of beliefs and theologies in Mormonism, just like in any tradition. But the theology that we were presented with there was not one that any of us seemed to be able to stomach. And when we were driving home, Dave said to us something like, I think that experience made me very sympathetic to atheists. May the God of love and justice bless us all, and when that God seems far away, may we bless each other.